Hello and welcome to this tutorial of Stata 16. I'll be showing you how some of the things work on the Mac. If you're using Windows or another platform, most of this stuff should be pretty similar, so it shouldn't be too hard to generalize to what we're doing here. First thing I want to show you is just a couple of things about the Stata interface. When you launch Stata, you're going to get several windows. I have up on the screen right now what is called the widescreen view. You can change that by going to the view menu to layout, and you can pick either sidebar or widescreen. I'm almost always working on a widescreen, so I prefer to have some additional stuff over here on the left as opposed to having it. What happens is if you hit sidebar, that goes away, and then you can select what would have been in that left-hand column over here on the right. But again, I'm almost always working on a widescreen computer, so I just prefer to keep it this way. Okay, so the main parts of the window that we care about right now are in here, the results. This is where we're going to see what things look like if we do a correlation matrix, it'll show up in here and that sort of thing. And down here in the command window, we're going to type some commands. So we'll go ahead and start with that. And so I'm going to load a data set. You're going to type the word sysuse, S-Y-S-U-S-E, auto. The auto data set is a data set that's built into the system or built into Stata. That's why it's sysuse. Sys stands for system. So it just ships with Stata. So you can type sysuse auto. What you can see is a couple of things have come up. It tells us right here that we have a result, and that just says we've loaded this 1978 automobile data. Okay, you'll notice a couple of things over here as you now get variable names. So this tells you what variables are in your data set. So we've got the make, price of a car, price of a car, miles per gallon, and so on going down. You also see the label. So this is the actual variable name, and that's what you're going to refer to when you do Stata commands. And then this is just a longer label so that if something isn't clear, like what Rep 78 means is the repair record for that car in 1978, and that just gives you a little more detail about that. Okay, if you select a variable over here, down here you'll get some information about the properties of that variable. The name, the label, it's going to give you the type of variable. Typically we're talking about string variables or numeric variables. String variables are words, or they're encoded as like alphabet letters, if you will. And numeric variables are what it sounds like, numbers. And there are different kinds of numeric variables, but most of that doesn't matter for us right at the moment, though it can matter in other situations. Over here on the left is what it's sometimes called the command log or the history. And so what that's going to do is as we type things, stuff will show up over here. So since we typed sysuse auto, that tells us the command we just used was sysuse auto. So let's take a look at some details about the data. So we can type the word describe. What describe will do is it'll give us information about the data set that we've loaded. So this tells us where the data set is stored on our computer. And again, it's built in, so it's part of the application. It tells us how many observations we have, how many different variables we have. It gives you the names of each of the variables, the types. So here again is a string variable. These are all different forms of numeric variables. It has a thing called a value label, which we'll cover at another time. And again, the variable labels. Okay, so that's a good way to just get a quick look at what's in your data set. If you've got a giant data set with many, many variables, that would be probably too overwhelming. But if you've got a smaller data set with not tons, even if it's got lots of observations but just a few variables, this can be a real nice way to look at things. Another thing we can do is we can summarize some of our variables. So if you type the word summarize and just summarize, and hit enter, you'll see what it does is gives you summary statistics for each of the variables in the data set. The make is the type of car, and it's stored as letters, so it can't really compute a mean or anything like that for that. So that's why you get no information on the make variable. But for our numeric variables like the price of the car and miles per gallon, you get things by how many observations they have, the mean of each, the standard deviation, as well as the min and the max. So it's really nice if you're just wanting to screen your data initially or get a sense of what the central tendency and dispersion are. You can do this real quick for every variable in your data set. Again, if you have lots of variables, this is overwhelming and not very useful. So if you want to limit it to just a couple of variables, then we'll just say summarize price. That'll just give us information for one of them. Or we can say summarize price and miles per gallon. And that'll give us information for two. You can also, Stata will allow you to do ranges of variables. So if we wanted the summary, if you're looking over here on the right, for the variable price down to headroom, you could say summarize price, then you do a dash, and then you say headroom. Okay, and that gives you each of the variables between price and headroom as it's stored in the data set. As I mentioned, the command describe will print out your the contents of the data set here in the results. But often it's nice to look at the data like you would if you were to open the data in Excel. So in order to do that, you can use the built-in data editor that's part of Stata, and you can access that up here on the menu bar by clicking right there. And what will happen is you'll get a spreadsheet view of the data set. And you got your variables across the top, your observations going down. So this is just like Excel or SPSS or really any spreadsheet view. Over here on the right, you have, again, the name and label of the variables, and you get more detail about it. Okay, a couple more features about the interface here. One is if you take these variables over here, you can click here in this column. So if I click right here with price, you'll see that it brings it down to the command window. So if I mean, it's easy enough just to type summarize price, but you can also type summarize and then just click here. And let's say you want these four, just click on those four things. They get down there and you can go ahead and run that. Another thing you often do with data analysis is graph your data. Stata has a number of built-in commands for producing most any graph that you might want. A simple graph we can do is a histogram. So in the command window, type the word histogram, and then let's just do MPG. So histogram MPG, hit enter, and up will come the graph window. You can see there's your histogram of miles per gallon. You can go ahead, if you want to save that out, you can hit save and save it to wherever you'd like. So you can pick some place, pick different output formats, PDF as an example, or a PNG file, and go ahead and save that. You can also hit this graph editor, and it'll come up with a different window, and you can manipulate aspects of the graph. So if you want to change the color to something else, you can. Another thing we can do as an example is a scatter plot. So you say, to do that, you say type two-way scatter, and we'll do price and miles per gallon. So it'll put price on the y-axis, miles per gallon on the x-axis, and give you a nice scatter plot for that. You can add things like regression lines and other sorts of things to scatter plots to help you visualize the relationships in your data. One of the nice things about Stata is its documentation. It's easy to find help for the commands, and the documentation is very uniform from command to command, and so once you get used to reading the style of help that you get on with Stata, it becomes pretty easy to read it in other situations. So the simplest way to get to the help menus is to go ahead in the command window and type help, and then let's say summarize. And it will bring up the help menu or the help documentation for the summarize command. So you'll see it tells you up here the command summarize and what it's doing. In this case, it's providing summary statistics. The next thing in the help documentation is the syntax for that command. So what this is saying is this is how you call it. You type the word summarize. And then it takes a var list, which is a variable list. So it's going to take, you add in variables there. So before, when we typed summarize MPG, it knew to get the summary statistics for miles per gallon. Now notice that var list is in brackets, and any option here or anything that's surrounded by brackets is optional, meaning you don't have to type it, because before we just typed the word summarize and it gave us the miles per, or the summary statistics for every variable in our data set. So we know we don't have to type that, but and you'll see some commands that require at least one variable as part of it. So if is allows us to subset our data. So if what we wanted was, notice over here, one of the variables is foreign. So it's US or foreign, so foreign to the United States. So one thing you could say is you could say summarize miles per gallon if, and then you can tell it we just want cars that are made in the United States. And you use that foreign variable to identify that. What in does is it lets you pick the particular observations. I'll show you that at another time, but if you want to just get the miles per gallon, for example, for the first 20 observations in your data set, you can use the in to tell it, just give me the first 20 observations. Weights are if you want to weight some observations more than others when you're computing things. We're not going to get into that really very much at all. It's a little bit more of an advanced topic. So it's not something we're going to deal with. Then the last part here are options. Most Stata commands have some options, and those are things to change the way that the output looks. So as an example, down here you get to see what some of the options that are available for the summarize command. So one of them is detail, and it'll provide additional statistics. Okay, so it'll give you more information than what we saw before, and I'll show you an example of how to do that here in a second. But before we do that, I just want to highlight that the options come after a comma, and that's consistent in Stata. So there are things we do prior to the comma to tell us which variables, which observations, that sort of things to use, and then after comma it has to do typically with what's going to be displayed for us in the results panel or in the results window. Okay, so let's try the option detail. So we're going to say summarize miles per gallon. So let's just show it what it looks like. So here you get your observations, mean, standard deviation, min and max. Now if we say summarize miles per gallon detail, now we get more information. We get the percentiles, you get the top or smallest 4 values, the largest 4 values. You get the variance, some skewness, and kurtosis sorts of information. Okay? All right, so let's bring that summarize thing back up. So one thing I hadn't mentioned earlier is the way in which you can use this command history. So if you want to use a command you've already used, you can just click up here in the command history. If you click once, it shows up down here. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So it brings back up the viewer for the help. Okay, a couple of other things just to pay attention to is notice that the letters SU here are underlined. What that's telling us is that's the portion of the command name, so it's the whole command name summarized, but Stata will recognize this command if you just type SU. Okay, if you look at the D here, it's underlined, so you don't have to write out the whole word detail, you can just use D. So we say SU MPG D, we should get the same result as what we got before. Okay, now I typically almost always write out the entire command, mostly because I think it makes it a lot more readable when I'm looking back at analyses I've done. Say it's a week later or 2 years later, I know what the phrase summarize does. And I know D, or I don't know that I would know that D stands for detail, but if the term detail is there, I think it's going to make it a little easier for you to understand. So I typically recommend that you do the whole thing, but I wanted you to know why there's those underlines there. Okay, additional things. Nearly all, maybe even all, I'm not sure of the statistical analyses and things you can do in Stata by typing commands into the command window you can do through drop-down menus. So you can come up here if you want summary statistics, you can click through and get the things that you want. This will tell you how you get it through the menus. So you go to the statistics menu up here, go to summaries, tables and tests, summary and descriptive statistics, and then summary statistics. And do that. For our purposes in our class, I'm going to have you do everything through commands, so we're not going to worry about that too much. Okay. There's additional information about the options. Usually there's often these additional tutorials here. Sometimes there's Stata, as a corporation, has made videos that you can click through and see some tutorials on how to do it, kind of like what you're watching right now. The last thing I'm going to point out is part of the here's that video example right here for descriptive statistics. So the last thing I'm going to point out is just the examples. So at the end of each help file, there'll be examples about how to use it. And so if you're unsure how to use a command, I typically go straight to the examples. And after you've read what some of the options are, and give them a try and see what the output is and see if you can make sense of it. There's other stuff here like the stored results, which we'll talk about at another time. All right, the last thing about help is the stuff that shows up in this help viewer, which we're looking at right now, is actually a condensed version of the help. They also have full PDF descriptions of each of their commands. The nice thing about the PDF stuff is it usually has more detail. It'll typically, if you're interested or need to know certain formulas and stuff like that, it'll provide formulas for how certain things are calculated, provides additional tutorial stuff. The PDFs are free and they're part of your license for Stata. They're also available even if you just need to look at it from home and you're working on a computer. Like, let's say your Stata is just at school, but you're at home and you need to look something up. All the PDF documentation's available just on Stata's website, so you can find it via Google with no problem at all. But there'll be a link to the PDF entry, so you just click show me the PDF manual entry. It'll open up and you get some details, some additional details about the summary statistics. If you look over here on the left, this will show you all the various help manuals that there are in Stata, which there's a ton. It's just pages and pages of stuff. I find them very readable and very helpful, so it's an incredibly useful resource. So a lot for a simple command like summarize, a lot of it's just going to be very similar to what we saw before, but they provide some additional info here and then walk you through the examples and explain what's what and what the output's like. So you can learn a lot just from looking at the help menu. All right, the very last topic I want to talk about in this introductory material is what are called do files. So up to this point, when we've wanted to do something with our data, we've typed it down here in the command window. So we said summarize miles per gallon. That's great. It'll give you the correct answers for all that. The problem is that it's not very replicable. It's important and critical for data analysis for whatever you do today. When you go to run your analyses again a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, or forever from now, that the results are the same, that you know where your numbers came from. And one key way to do that is to collect all of your commands into a single file, which you can then submit that file to Stata or bits of that file to Stata and have it run the analyses. And so the way you do that in Stata is what's called a do file. So if you click here where it says do file editor, a text editor like this will come up. And what we're going to do here is we're going to just collect all of our commands in here. So I'm going to type the word clear all, and what that's going to do is it's going to get rid of all the data loaded in Stata's memory and just clear it out. And then we're going to type sysuse auto. That will load that auto data set. I'm going to type describe, which will describe the data. We'll say summarize, miles per gallon, price. Okay. And then let's say we also decide to separately summarize the weight and length. And then last, we decide we want a histogram of miles per gallon. Okay. So what you can do is you could select all of this. Okay. And then you're going to hit this button up here called do. And that will set, when you've selected stuff, it will execute, as it says, the selection. So you go ahead and say execute. You'll see that what it's done is it's run everything. So here's that, it just sends it over to Stata, if you will. And so it clears it out, loads that data set, describes the data, gives us our summary statistics, and then created our histogram for us. Okay, so now if it's a week from now, I can save this data set, or excuse me, save this do file, and it's just a text file, so you can save it anywhere on your computer. You can open it up a week from now and run it again, and you'll get the exact same answers. You can also add little comments by adding, there's several ways to do this, but I'll just show you one. You can add little asterisks at the beginning. You'll see it's coded green. So if I just say, this will describe the data in the loaded data set. Okay, state that as a comment, and Stata will ignore comments. It'll show it here, but it just doesn't give you an error because it doesn't try to do anything with it. Okay, so it's telling you this will describe the loaded data set, so then you get describe, and that stuff showing up down there. So we can do that again here. We can say summarize miles per gallon price. And then you could add any comment you want. They can be lengthy, whatever you need. But that also helps with replicability because it'll help you remember later on what you did and why you did it. So if you're in my classes, I'm going to expect you to use do files. If you're just learning data analysis or just learning Stata, I'd strongly encourage you to use do files as the primary way of interacting with Stata so that you have replicable analyses. Okay, so this has been a whirlwind tour through the interface for Stata. There's a lot more to learn, and I encourage you just to kind of poke around. A lot of it's pretty intuitive. Some of it isn't, and as you spend more time with it, you'll get to understand sort of the ins and outs and how things operate within the program. All right, thank you.